In my last video, I did a gender tier list. I learned a lot about gender, came out as dreg gender, changed my pronouns to dree drem. It was a great time, and I learned a lot about gender. But I've also come to the realization lately that all of the things that I learned about gender are also applicable to politics. There's this old saying that I believe my grandfather once told me. He said, every time a Tumblr user invents a gender, a 4chan user invents a political ideology. This seems to draw some broad correlation between politics and gender, but I think that connection goes a lot deeper. And in this video, I am going to bridge the gender-politics divide. You see, the primary conceit that the gender people are working off of is that gender is just a framework. Sometimes the framework is built around some kind of reality, a biological reality like sexual characteristics, or maybe a mental illness in the case of neurogender like autism or PTSD. So if we buy that gender is a framework, and we buy that politics is a framework, then we can apply all of the gender descriptive frameworks to political frameworks. And in doing that, we actually find out a lot about how people interface with politics. Okay, let's look at chameleogender. There's a lot of genders, by the way, that function exactly like chameleogender, but we'll use this one because I think the image of a chameleon is evocative, even though this comment says that our understanding of chameleons is wrong. Anyway, let's just, whatever. Chameleogender basically says that around men, the chameleogender person will feel and act more like a man, and around women, the chameleogender will act and feel more like a woman. So they're describing essentially a malleable, a fluid framework when it comes to specifically their gender that changes depending on the people around them. Let's apply that to politics. What is a chameleopolitical person doing? A chameleopolitical person around a bunch of left-wingers feels like a left-winger, but around a bunch of right-wingers feels like a right-winger. Now, the kinds of people who interface with politics in this way exist. It's not a good way to interface with politics. You know, I always encourage people to be more defined in their beliefs. So the broader form of chameleogender is just gender fluid. That's whenever your gender shifts over time. Gender fluid maps pretty neatly onto politifluid, political fluid, I don't know, political fluid. They change their political ideology in a way that is comparable, similar, maybe exactly like the way that gender fluid people change their gender. The gender framework is being altered in the same way as the political framework is. For a politifluid person, maybe they wake up in the morning feeling more left-wing or right-wing. You ever just wake up and you're like, yep. It's fascism today. Okay, real quick, let's go over the genders you should avoid. The political equivalent of agender people is clearly apolitical people. There are, in fact, anti-gender people, and I would make a direct correlation with them and the radical apolitical people that want to destroy politics. Cisgender people have a strong gender framework. They don't even question their gender throughout their lives. A cispolitical person is somebody who would never question which side of the political aisle they're on for their entire lives. Some people are born right-wing and stay right-wing their entire lives. Maybe they'll go a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left, but ultimately they'll always be on the right side of the political axis. Then a transpolitical person would be someone who goes from being hard right to hard left. This is the same function of irony, by the way, but that's another video. So xenogenders are strange, weird, wacky genders like cat gender, where your gender feels like that of a cat. Xenopolitical would probably just be what we call wacky ideologies, like Posadism, anarcho-monarchy, and transhumanism. Wacky. That won't happen. Xeno ideologies interact with politics in this fundamentally other way that breaks from the traditional axes we use to talk about politics. For example, let's take the age spectrum. On one end of the age spectrum, we have gerontocracy, where you want only old people to rule. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have the unfortunately named pedarchy. This spectrum is not how most people think about politics. To have your entire political ideology be defined around wanting kids to rule, it's just not how we talk about politics. And don't even get me started on the off-compass fetus tyranny and necromonarchy, okay? We're not ready for that yet. Another good example of what we could call the xenopolitical is Posadism. Posadism is defined by being very extreme in the UFO axis. This isn't a left-right divide issue, by the way. Tucker Carlson is also an extremist on the spectrum. Posadists are also extremists in the should I use nuclear bombs yes spectrum, which again is not how we normally talk about politics. Here's some more quick genders to get the noggin jog. Variant gender is a gender that changes once it's observed. A variant political person, as soon as their political ideology is observed, adopts a brand new political ideology to mask their old one. Vibrant gender people have a mostly stable gender that fluctuates wildly during a short interval of time and then goes back to their base gender. So for your base politics, you have a pretty stable political identity, but sometimes it fluctuates wildly for a short period of time. Gender mirror is what happens when someone mirrors the gender of another person that they're close to. Politomirror is what happens when a liberal woman marries a conservative man. This is also reflected in terms like amour gender, which changes depending on who you love, and atrafluid, which changes your gender depending on the people who you are attracted to. If your political beliefs get bowled over by someone else's political beliefs, then you're probably this. Yeah, laugh at the helicopter gender while you can. Fast forward 100 years and everybody's got a rotary blade attached to their foreheads, and your grandkids are ashamed of your bigotry. Obviously, heli political people are just neocons. The internet sometimes acts as a schizophrenizing force, and what it did to gender, it'll do to politics. There are 3 axioms that held up the old gender framework. That gender was simple, binary, and stable. The destabilization of these 3 axioms made gender complicated, non-binary, and unstable. These 3 axioms, so too, have applied to politics in the past. Politics being binary, simple, and stable. Now, politics is non-binary, unstable, and not very simple at all. Schizophrenia, or maybe it's capital, I don't know, smashes monoliths, takes these big structures and blasts them to a million pieces, each piece ripe for infestation. Was the political compass the beginning of this schizophrenization? Was it then that politics went from a single binary to 2? Now we've got 100. And autism gender basically just applies to every political ideology. Now, some of you might say that a lot of this seems like a lot of thinking your way into justifying a mental illness. Yes. You think mental illness is going to go away? We're all mentally ill now, buddy. Everyone's just gonna, you think that's what's going to happen? Now. You think that's what's going to happen? Here's another interesting thing for your brain to chew on, all right? There's a gender where your experience of gender changes not just like day to day, like gender fluid people might, but they're so gender fluid, they might change hour to hour or minute to minute. There's no way of predicting what their gender is going to be. It's extremely unstable. This is like BPD. It's the same, it's BPD. It's the BPD of gender. And what that would mean with politics would be some kind of political identity that also changes hour to hour, minute to minute, event to event. You cannot predict what your political position is going to be. Gender and politics are both identity frameworks. An identity framework basically cuts through the noise, and there is a lot of noise, but it basically puts a form around the noise and makes things less confusing and terrifying. I made this video just to get the gears turning in your mind, to make some connections yourself. I mean, are the third positionists third gender, non-binary, non-political binary? I mean, come on, these connections make themselves. At least I sure hope they do, otherwise I forgot to take my meds again. And that's all the comparisons I can make between gender and politics, just off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's a lot of interesting ways of interfacing with gender that also apply to politics that I'm just not aware of. I guess there is one more comparison I could maybe make between similarities between gender and politics. I mean, I guess I could maybe, like, if I were to adopt a certain framework, I could perhaps see gender and politics both as a representation of the schizophrenization of identity made manifest by the accelerations that we make fun of now, like transracialism. It's going to be made manifest simply by desire. And so the joke of those that identify as unicorns eventually will manifest when a TikToker who identifies as a unicorn has the ability to dye their skin purple and graft a horn to their head. And there will be a bioconservative reaction. Certainly, people will want to keep their flesh, but the flesh is weak. Once this unicorn gets 100 million followers on TikTok, their followers will want to become unicorns as well. And that's how you get unicorns. And what then? What if these unicorns get more views on their social media? What if they make 10 times more money than the average person because of their purple skin? What do we do about the unicorn master race? Do you fight against them? It's not going to work. By the time you get rid of the unicorns, the werewolves and the vampires have already popped up. It's already here. You can lean into it, or you can try to step away. But there is no such thing as being in the middle. To stay in the same spot, you have to run. Anyway, gender and politics, they're like so fun, and the colors are so nice.